She walked into the store like any other young woman, quiet, humble, and invisible to most. But to one man, she wasn't just another customer. To him, she was poor, insignificant, and not worth respect. All because of the color of her skin. When the cashier demanded something she didn't have, laughter followed. The manager sneered, mocking her in front of strangers, convinced she was powerless, convinced she was nobody. But what he didn't know was that this nobody carried a secret. A truth that would flip his world upside down. It wasn't just about a balance. It wasn't just about a receipt. It was about dignity, respect, and the way society decides who matters, and who doesn't. What happened in that store would expose something far greater than one man's cruelty. It would reveal the dangerous weight of judgment, the scars of racism, and the shocking truth about who she really was. And when that truth came out, no one was ready for it. It was a morning like so many others. The city was already buzzing with movement, the hum of traffic, the chatter of people rushing to work, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a corner bakery. In the middle of it all, she walked with quiet steps, carrying books pressed tightly against her chest. To most who passed her by, she was just another face in the crowd. But if you looked closely, you'd notice the worn shoes, the careful way she avoided eye contact, and the gentle strength in her eyes that told a deeper story. Her name was Maya. She was young, determined, and hopeful, though life had given her little reason to be. Raised by a single mother who worked endless shifts as a maid in wealthy homes, Maya learned early what it meant to be overlooked. She was smart, disciplined, and carried herself with a dignity that poverty couldn't take away. But in a city that judged by appearances, she often found herself invisible, or worse, dismissed. Still, she dreamed. She dreamed of finishing school, of building a future beyond the limits others expected for her. Every morning, she studied before leaving for her part-time job. Every evening, she helped her mother with household chores. Her days were simple, repetitive, and exhausting. But beneath that routine was a quiet fire, the belief that her story could be different. The small store she often visited was part of that routine. It was ordinary, with flickering lights and shelves that never seemed quite full. The clerks rarely greeted her, and the manager never smiled in her direction. But Maya didn't complain. She walked in, bought what little she could afford, and walked out again. To her, it was just another place to pass through. She never expected it to become the stage for a moment that would reveal so much more than a missing balance. What no one around her knew was the truth she carried quietly. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She wasn't just a poor girl trying to get by. Her father, the man she had rarely spoken about, was someone no one would expect. Someone with power, with influence, with a name that could change how people looked at her in an instant. But Maya had chosen to keep that part of her life hidden. She wanted to be seen for who she was, not for who her father was. And so, she lived between two worlds. One where she scrubbed floors beside her mother, saving every coin for tomorrow. And another, silent world that tied her to a name most people would never believe belonged to her. It was this balance, between invisibility and untold truth, that shaped her every step. She thought she could control it, thought she could protect herself from judgment by staying quiet. But judgment, she would soon learn, doesn't wait for permission. The day she walked into that store, carrying only the little she had, something shifted. The manager had been watching her longer than she realized. His eyes, filled with suspicion, followed her every move. To him, she wasn't a customer. She was a target. A reminder of every stereotype he carried in his mind. And when the moment came, when the balance she didn't have became his excuse, he struck with words sharper than knives. Maya didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning. The moment her silence, her dignity, and her hidden truth would collide with prejudice in a way no one could ignore. Because sometimes, it isn't the big stages or crowded arenas that reveal who people truly are. Sometimes it's the small, ordinary places, the checkout counter of a store, the voice of a manager who thinks no one is listening, that expose the harshest truths. And for Maya, this store would become exactly that. Maya stepped into the store that afternoon, unaware that every choice she made inside those walls would be judged through a lens she could never control. The air smelled faintly of stale bread and bleach. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on aisles that always seemed a little emptier than the big supermarkets across town. She clutched her small wallet, counting the folded notes and coins inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough for what she needed, just a few essentials before heading home. She moved quietly, careful not to draw attention, her steps measured. But attention found her anyway. From behind the counter, the manager's eyes tracked her every move. His gaze wasn't casual, it was heavy, suspicious, dripping with the kind of doubt reserved for those he had already decided didn't belong. He leaned against the register, arms crossed, whispering something to the cashier beside him. The cashier smirked, glancing at Maya, then back at the manager. Whatever was said, it wasn't kind. Maya felt it. The way the air seemed to tighten around her. She had experienced it before, the silent trial where she was the defendant, and the only evidence presented was her skin, her clothes, her silence. She pretended not to notice, but her heart picked up speed. She focused on the shelves, picking up a loaf of bread, some rice, and milk. Ordinary items. Ordinary actions. Yet, to the men watching, it was enough to confirm their suspicions. When she approached the counter, the manager straightened. His smile was thin, mocking, the kind of expression that wasn't meant to welcome but to wound. He rang up her items slowly, each beep of the scanner louder than the last. Then he named the total. Maya opened her wallet, sliding coins and bills onto the counter. She was short, by just a little. Not enough to be humiliating in any fair world. But in this world, under this man's stare, it was everything. The manager leaned in, voice dripping with disdain. Not enough? Figures. His words weren't shouted, but they carried. The cashier chuckled softly, loud enough for Maya to hear. Heat rose in her chest. She looked down, her fingers tightening around the wallet. She wasn't begging. She wasn't stealing. She simply didn't have the extra coins, and that should have been the end of it. But the manager wasn't finished. Maybe next time, he said, his tone theatrical, come prepared. Unless you think someone like me should cover it for you? He looked around at the few customers nearby, inviting them to share in the mockery. A couple of them smiled awkwardly, some looked away. No one stepped forward. Maya's face burned. She wanted to vanish, to escape the spotlight of humiliation. She quietly set aside the milk, bringing the total within her reach. She offered the smaller amount with trembling hands. But the manager refused. Oh no, he said, his voice sharper now. You don't get to pick and choose. This isn't charity. He pushed the items aside dramatically. No balance, no purchase. That's the rule. Unless, his smirk widened. Unless you've got something else to offer. The cashier laughed outright this time, shaking his head as though Maya were some ridiculous joke. The other customers pretended to busy themselves, but every ear was tuned to the scene unfolding. Maya froze. The weight of every eye on her pressed down like chains. She felt stripped bare, not just of money, but of dignity. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a quiet defiance sparked. She gathered her courage, ready to walk away, to leave with nothing but her pride intact. But the manager wasn't done. He raised his voice, calling out across the store. See, folks? No balance. Wants to shop with no balance. Maybe she thinks rules don't apply to her. His laughter rang out, cruel and hollow. The scene had become a spectacle, and Maya was the unwilling star. Her legs trembled as she turned to leave. But as she reached the door, the manager added one last strike. Poor little girl, he muttered loudly. No father, no money, no future. The words cut deeper than any blade. He didn't know the truth, he couldn't have. But in his ignorance, he had touched the wound Maya kept hidden. Her father. The man whose name could silence this mockery in a heartbeat. The man whose influence could shatter the smug smile on the manager's face. But she had chosen not to reveal him. She wanted her own life, her own worth, not a borrowed identity. Now, though, she questioned that choice. As she stepped outside, her hands trembling, tears threatened but did not fall. She would not give him that victory. She lifted her chin, breathing deeply. But the sting of humiliation burned hotter with each step. What she didn't realize was that others had noticed too. A woman near the entrance shook her head in disgust, not at Maya, but at the cruelty she had just witnessed. Another customer whispered to a friend, their eyes following Maya as she left. The moment was not as invisible as the manager believed. Seeds of outrage were quietly planted. But inside the store, the manager felt victorious. He laughed with the cashier, retelling the moment as if it were entertainment. To him, Maya was already forgotten, a nameless girl he had reduced to nothing. He didn't know the storm that was coming. Because humiliation has a way of echoing. It lingers in the minds of those who witness it. And when the truth about who Maya really was finally came to light, the memory of this moment would not fade. It would resurface, brighter, harsher, and far more damning than he could ever imagine. Maya walked home with her head high, but inside her, a battle raged. She thought of her mother, who had endured countless moments like this, swallowing the pain to survive another day. She thought of the nights she had stayed up studying, believing that education and perseverance could shield her from the cruelty of prejudice. And she thought of her father, the man whose existence she rarely acknowledged, whose very name could have ended the nightmare she had just endured. But she hadn't spoken his name. Not yet. That night, as she lay awake, the manager's laughter replayed in her mind. His words repeated, cutting deeper with every echo. No father, no future. He had no idea how wrong he was. And soon, the world would see it too. Because Maya's story wasn't just about a missing balance. It wasn't about a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. It was about the weight of every judgment cast on those society deems unworthy. It was about the cruelty hidden in everyday encounters, the quiet violence of words meant to diminish. And as the days unfolded, this single encounter would ripple outward, drawing in witnesses, sparking conversations, and forcing truths into the open that could no longer be ignored. The manager believed he had silenced Maya. In reality, he had lit the fuse of something far greater. And when the explosion came, he would never forget it. The store was supposed to be behind her. She told herself she could forget it, bury the humiliation in silence the same way her mother had buried so many wounds before. But silence doesn't erase scars. It only makes them deeper. The following week, Maya found herself back on that street. She hadn't planned to return. Every step toward the store sent waves of nausea rolling through her stomach. But necessity has no patience for pride. Her mother needed groceries, and Maya couldn't let her go alone, not after the way she had been treated. The store's neon sign flickered weakly in the afternoon light, buzzing like an omen. Maya hesitated at the door, clutching her list. Inside, laughter spilled from the counter. She knew that laugh. The manager. He was telling the story again, his voice carrying, exaggerating, embellishing the humiliation as though it were a badge of honor. Her chest tightened. She froze near the entrance, invisible yet again. A few customers gathered, chuckling along as he performed. He mimicked her voice, bent his posture in mockery, tossed imaginary coins onto the counter. His audience laughed louder. Maya's nails dug into her palms. The heat in her face returned, fiercer this time. This wasn't just cruelty, it was sport. He had turned her pain into entertainment. And then, like wildfire, whispers spread through the store. A rumor. A question. A single phrase floating from one customer to the next. Do you know who she really is? The manager stopped mid-performance, startled by the ripple. His eyes darted around, unsettled. What are you talking about? He demanded. But the crowd had shifted. A woman near the back, the same one who had seen everything the first time, spoke up. Her voice trembled, but her conviction didn't. I know that girl. That's Maya. She's not what you think she is. The manager scoffed, trying to laugh it off. But the whispers grew louder. Someone pulled out their phone, scrolling, searching, then gasping. A name flashed across the screen. A name that silenced the laughter instantly. It was her father's. The truth burst into the open. The poor girl with no balance, the maid's daughter mocked for having nothing, she was the daughter of the CEO. The man whose wealth, power, and influence stretched across the city like roots through the soil. Gasps filled the air. Customers stepped back, eyes wide. The cashier's smirk vanished. And the manager, his face drained of color. But the worst wasn't over. Because at that very moment, the glass door swung open, and in walked a tall figure, commanding in presence. Her father. The CEO. He hadn't planned to be there, but when whispers reach men of his stature, they move quickly. And the whispers about his daughter's humiliation had spread far beyond the store walls. The air shifted, heavy, suffocating. The manager stumbled over his words, stammering apologies that sounded hollow, desperate. But the CEO didn't look at him. His eyes were fixed on Maya, on the silent strength she carried even as her world tilted under the weight of the moment. The crowd waited. Phones were out now, cameras recording. Every second, every breath was captured. The humiliation that once belonged only to Maya was now a public reckoning. And here, in this suffocating silence, Maya stood taller than she ever had before. Her tears had dried. Her trembling had stilled. What remained was fire. This was the turning point. She didn't need to speak her father's name. The world had already spoken it for her. But as the manager dropped to desperate pleas, as the crowd murmured in disbelief, Maya realized something bigger. This moment wasn't just about revenge, or exposing him, or even reclaiming her dignity. It was about the truth. The truth of what it means to live in a world where worth is decided by skin, by money, by the perception of power. A world where she had been treated like nothing, until they discovered whose daughter she was. The cameras caught her silence. The crowd waited for her words. And the manager's face, twisted with regret, drenched in fear, showed the rawest truth of all. He hadn't seen her humanity until he realized her connections. The injustice screamed louder than any apology could silence. And in that moment, Maya finally lifted her head, her voice steady, unshaking. "You never saw me," she said softly. "Not until now." The words cut through the air like thunder. Gasps echoed. The manager collapsed into stammering excuses. The crowd erupted in murmurs. And the CEO's jaw tightened, his eyes cold as stone. But for Maya, the moment wasn't about him. It wasn't about power or status. It was about the cruel revelation that dignity, to some, only exists when backed by wealth. The cameras kept rolling. The story was no longer confined to this store. It was alive, spreading, unstoppable. And as Maya stood there, facing the man who had reduced her to a punchline, she knew the world was about to see the truth, not just of who she was, but of what he had done. The climax had arrived. The stage was set. The downfall was only beginning. The store grew silent after Maya's words. Not the kind of silence that fades quickly, but the kind that lingers, heavy, pressing into the walls and into every watching heart. The manager's arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a trembling desperation. The crowd shifted uneasily, realizing they had witnessed something larger than an argument at a checkout counter. Maya stood tall, her breathing steady, her eyes unflinching. For the first time, she wasn't the invisible girl, overlooked and mocked. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was herself, seen, heard, undeniable. Yet the weight of the moment was not only hers. It carried something deeper, the truth of how fragile dignity is in a world quick to judge and slow to show compassion. Her father stepped closer, his presence commanding, but Maya didn't look to him for rescue. This wasn't about him. The power he carried wasn't hers to borrow, it wasn't the answer to what had happened. Because the truth was simple, and it cut sharper than wealth ever could, if she hadn't been his daughter, none of these people would have cared. The cruelty she endured would have been dismissed as ordinary, forgotten by evening. That realization burned. Yes, the manager would face consequences. The CEO's presence ensured that. His business reputation would take a blow, his career would likely crumble, and his name would be stained with the weight of his prejudice. But Maya's thoughts weren't on him anymore. She thought of every girl like her, every young woman without a powerful name to shield her, who walked into stores, schools, and workplaces only to face the same kind of silent trial. Their humiliation wouldn't go viral. Their dignity wouldn't be restored by the sudden shock of discovery. And that was the deeper tragedy. The cameras caught every second. The videos spread quickly, far beyond the neighborhood, far beyond the city. Within hours, the story appeared on screens across the country. Headlines called it the Balance Incident. Some framed it as a scandal, others as an outrage, still others as a reflection of how deep racism runs through the simplest corners of everyday life. Maya saw her face on phones and televisions, her words replayed again and again, "You never saw me. Not until now." They became a rallying cry, shared in hashtags, painted on protest signs, spoken in classrooms and workplaces. Strangers reached out, some offering support, others confessing their own silent scars of humiliation and dismissal. Yet beneath the noise, Maya felt both pride and sorrow. Pride that her voice had sparked something. Sorrow that it took the revelation of her father's identity for people to finally listen. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering her mother's quiet endurance. How many times had her mother been mocked, overlooked, humiliated, only to come home in silence because she had no shield, no platform, no one to amplify her pain? How many women and men lived their entire lives unseen, their struggles buried beneath society's indifference? The weight of that truth pressed down harder than the humiliation ever had. Maya didn't want to be remembered as the CEO's daughter. She wanted to be remembered as the girl who was mocked, humiliated, and then seen, not because of her last name, but because her humanity demanded it. And maybe, just maybe, this story would open more eyes. Maybe the next time someone like her walked into a store, or a classroom, or an office, they wouldn't be dismissed so quickly. Maybe they would be seen before their worth was questioned. The incident changed her life, yes. But more importantly, it revealed the cracks in the world around her, the cracks so many fall through every single day. For the manager, the downfall was swift. His apologies came too late, drowned out by the tidal wave of public outrage. He became a cautionary tale, his face etched into the story as a symbol of arrogance and cruelty. But even as the world turned its anger on him, Maya knew this wasn't about one man. It was about the system that made his cruelty possible, the silence of the customers who looked away, the acceptance of everyday humiliation that people had learned to call normal. The bigger story wasn't his fall. It was the millions of stories just like hers, stories without cameras, without headlines, without a powerful father to walk through the door at the perfect moment. That truth is what haunted her most. Because for every Maya, there are countless others whose dignity is trampled in silence. And the world never knows their names. So what is the lesson here? That power protects? That wealth speaks louder than humanity? Or is it that dignity should never have required either in the first place? The video ends where it began, not with a purchase, not with a balance, but with a question. How many more humiliations, how many more ordinary acts of racism must be endured before humanity learns to see people, not status, not skin, not stereotypes, but people? Maya's story is not just her own. It is the story of millions. It is the story of every unseen person, every unheard voice, every life diminished because of prejudice. And now, as you sit with her words, ask yourself this. When the next Maya walks into your world, will you see her before it's too late?